I'm so happy that I get to do my talk kind of twice because a lot of what I want to say when I talk about the problems with the Ontario NDP kind of bleed into what I want to say about Quebec.Ca. I think it is really interesting to see, and this is interesting in the English sense, not in the French sense, because when we say interesting in French, it usually means good. I think it's very interesting to see when you look at the higher education sector in Ontario and the higher education sector in Quebec, that after the Quebec student strikes, the really inspiring mobilizations that happened across the province in 2012, that the province of Quebec was left with the same tuition fee policy as what we have in Ontario. Okay, it's the same percentage increase. Of course, that means dollar to dollar, it's higher in Ontario because tuition fees are higher. But even after that incredible explosion on the streets of Quebec, we are left with a 3% tuition fee increase with both governments. And I start with that because I think there's a tendency among the left in Ontario to really romanticize what's going on in Quebec and to imagine that the people of Quebec are all kind of like activists at heart. And so it's really hard to do that in Ontario because we come from this like inherited WASP tradition, whether or not we are in fact WASPs, and it's really hard to mobilize people. Well, no, the political sophistication of people in Quebec is not that different than in Ontario. We've got folks here from very different regions actually in the province, which is also really exciting. There's folks from the west in Gatineau. Mathieu's from Montreal, which is kind of like the Toronto of Quebec, right? In a lot of different ways. All the good and the bad. And I'm based in Quebec City, which for a lot of Ontarians think it's really close to Montreal. It's not, it's 3 hours away. I know it's not that far, but it's 3 hours away. And we are a city that never voted in favor of sovereignty, okay? Even though that Quebec would be a new national capital, the people of Quebec City never voted in favor of sovereignty. And when you talk to folks in Montreal, it's like, oh, you live in that little fascist town, Quebec. Because our mayor does enjoy in the 80 percentile of votes. Like, that guy is popular and he is not that smart. But he brings Madonna to the Plains of Abraham, and so we all love him. And so that's also the big joke in Quebec, which is why I really want to laugh about that. That's kind of the interesting political kind of context in which we operate in Quebec City. And it's also the kind of place where an Anglophone can show up for a campaign, an election campaign, and be like, I speak no French. Well, that's not totally true, but I speak very little French. Work the entire campaign and not be considered a member of the RCMP because they assume people don't suck. Another huge difference between big cities and small cities. Getting involved was actually quite easy. So since I've been in Quebec, it's been about two years, coming up almost exactly the next couple of days. I've been very involved in Quebec.Ca. And I think what cannot be overstated, is the difference between Quebec.Ca and any other political party in Canada. A lot of people kind of think it's the NDP and QS, kind of similar. Sure, the NDP is not as good, but they're still left-wing. No, the Quebec.Ca is a fundamentally different party. And because of that, it's a party that still sits with about 7% popularity. One of the most important parts of Quebec.Ca that I think progressives need to understand is that fundamentally it's a party based on democracy, on democratic decision making. And that democratic decision making was really evident during the election. During the election, QS was advocating radical changes, like, as Benoit said, getting Quebec out of the oil business in 15 years. But even with its imagery, our placards, one placard actually featured a disgusting, dirty gas pump with grass growing out of it. Okay, that was our mainstream placard, and on my street beside a Shell gas station was this dirty placard, oil. It's like, screw oil, we're all gonna die. This is the kind of rhetoric that the party put out during the election campaign, and because of that, it does win the hearts of people, even if it hasn't won their votes. And also part of that is kind of it's seen in the response of the last election, where Quebec.Ca pick a slogan which was, I vote with my heart. Because of what I'm thinking, I'm voting with my heart. Okay, which is like, what the hell? Sorry, you're voting with your heart? It was actually a direct response to strategic voting, because of course in 2012 there was a lot of people who expressed support for Quebec.Ca but couldn't make government probably, so we're going to vote for the Parti Québécois ones, right? The process that the party has to determine its platform is really, really democratic. And one of the best examples I can think of for this is, my riding association. We have about 400 members in the downtown Quebec City riding. It's the most progressive riding in Quebec City. It's the only one of two that elected the Parti Québécois, for example. Everywhere else is a battleground between the CAQ and the Liberals. And we literally voted on our local platform. So our local candidate had a platform of 50 points that she was able to then talk to the press about where we positioned ourselves. And I think that was really important, because it meant that the party was still rooted in the activity of the people who were doing the work. And of course, QS members are also really involved in a lot of other places. There's people who are working for anti-poverty organizations, and there are unionists, and there's also a lot of average people, nurses and doctors and teachers and child care educators. There are a lot of challenges to keep QS to the left as well, and that's something that a lot of the people at the front of the room are engaged in. There is a real pull towards electoralism. You can see it really at the conventions, where there's a lot of people who think that the priority of the party should be to win seats, right? Which is the priority of every political party. But then so the question becomes, to what extent do you privilege that discussion over a political discussion? But thanks to the organizing of formal networks and informal networks of very committed progressives, that electoralism has been really kind of fought wherever it wherever it appears. There's a real battle within the party to say, no, we should be talking about the issues that matter to people. We should not be necessarily talking about increasing our vote share. Because at the heart of it, as progressives, we believe that people who agree with our policies, or people will agree with our policies. That's what progressives believe, right? If all of us in this room didn't think that we can convince people that we're right, well, then we're actually all collectively delusional, right? Like, that doesn't work. So the real question becomes, how do you organize and how do you bring these issues to people on the ground? So what are some lessons for Ontario? Well, I think, first of all, we have to understand just how similar things are for both provinces right now. Both provinces have pensions as being the issue that's coming down. What's the difference? Well, in Quebec, the coalition of unions that Benoit talked about, they descended on the National Assembly at 10,000 people strong, right? There was 75 buses of people that were brought for the throne speech this year. What's the other difference? None of the people in the social movements in Quebec City knew that this was happening, right? Or they knew, but they weren't there. Or there wasn't an organized presence to be there. So there are some challenges that we have to face. In Ontario, the pension issue is also going to be a big issue. And so what are the strategies that we can share so that in Ontario there's a similar fight back, especially around the organizing that's already been done through the OFL to stop HUDAC. We also have to look at what role sovereignty, the question that sovereignty plays in Quebec, in broadening the political perspectives that are possible. So in Ontario, we are kind of stuck with the lens that federalism has imposed on us, right? Healthcare, education, provincial matters, everything else, or there's all these federal matters. We can't kind of get through or get past what has been imposed on us, and it limits our abilities to really enact change that we need. In Quebec, when you imagine that another world is possible with a sovereign Quebec, all of a sudden it doesn't matter what the federal government thinks. We want to have our provincial pension plan. We have a provincial pension plan. We want to make sure that there's a Quebec for the future by Quebecers for Quebecers. We create a national child care program, right? That the spaces that are opened up by this discussions of sovereignty actually allow the left a lot more lateral movement in Quebec than exists in Ontario. And so when we talk about progressives supporting sovereignty, it also means in Ontario, people talking about us supporting grassroots democracy that might reject the structures of confederation that have been placed on Ontario as well. Because it actually opens up a lot of spaces for what is possible. And I'll just end with, there was a political cartoon in La Presse in my paper, Le Soleil, which is owned by La Presse, so I assume it was in La Presse as well. Correct me if I'm wrong, Matthew. And it featured a guy reading the 2014 budget, right? And he looks at it, he's like, oh, that's not that bad, because it isn't that bad. Like, it's not good, but it's not that bad. And right behind him is the premier, Philippe Couillard, with 15 budget, about to smack it over his head, right? That is exactly the exact same situation as what's happening here. The big difference is that Kathleen Wynne has announced that the age of austerity is finished in Ontario, and Philippe Couillard is like, yeah, austerity, we're still in the age of austerity. So that's a really positive aspect for organizers in Ontario, to be able to start drawing on the rhetoric that the Liberals are using to mobilize people, expose them as liars, expose them as playing off of what people believe in and what is popular for power, and try to do that mobilization work that I talked about earlier that's necessary to be able to pull social movements to the left and to build them stronger. Thank you.